Cool. Let's give folks a chance to trickle in. I think.
All right. Hello. For those of you joining us, let us know where you're joining from in the chat box. Would love to know. Christina and Devin, you're both joining from the office, I assume.
We are.
Not that, you know, a whiteboard is strange to have at home or anything like that.
Sometimes people think that this is my house, and I'm like, why would I have fluorescent lighting and a whiteboard behind me?
I'm a warm lighting kind of gal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely would not have fluorescence at home. All right, San Antonio, Bakersfield, California. Hello. El Centro. All right. If you see fluorescent lights in someone's house, the first thing you do is leave. A little extreme. Depends on who whose house it is.
True.
All right. Palmdale, nice. All right, it's 2:03. I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today and welcome to our AVG pre-apprenticeship speaker series. My name is Sarah and excuse me if there's some background noise, I have the window open. My name is Sarah, I'm BRIC's Director of Communications and your moderator for today. And this speaker series is brought to you by the BRIC Foundation, which aims to provide early career awareness and education about all the exciting careers that exist across animation, visual effects, and gaming. For those of you who may not know BRIC, we are a nonprofit org dedicated to increasing representation across entertainment, gaming, media, and tech. And today we have an amazing presentation all about video game world building by two industry experts. We have Christina Wun here and Devin Fay. So we'll start off with a presentation first and then end with an audience Q&A in the last 15 minutes or so. So if you guys have any questions along the way, please feel free to utilize that Q&A box and we'll do our best to address your questions. So to introduce our two guests here, I'll start with Christina. Christina is the Senior Creative Director for VALORANT, and she is responsible for overseeing the style and quality of the game's creative expressions across art, audio, and narrative, working to ensure these creative expressions deepen a player's emotional connection to the game. Prior to her time on VALORANT, Christina worked as both the senior art director and product lead on Wild Rift, and also scaled Riot Games' art department by building its operational capabilities globally. That's amazing. She began her 15+ year career in video games as a visual effects artist, developing both AAA console titles and her penchant for communicating gameplay with satisfying and unique visual experiences. Outside of her daily work life, Christina has served on the board of directors or advisors for the Game Developers Conference and on the board of directors for Mental Health America of LA. So welcome, Christina. We also have Devin Fay here, who is a graduate of the Noman School of VFX and who started his career in Blizzard Entertainment's film department. He began working on matte-painted environments for projects such as StarCraft II, Wings of Liberty, and World of Warcraft Cataclysm, which is amazing. And he continued to work at Blizzard as a matte painting lead for Diablo 3 and more World of Warcraft titles. While constantly seeking new challenges and techniques, he decided to transfer his career to real-time environments for games. Devin moved to work on the Call of Duty series at Infinity Ward as a senior environment artist. He has continued his environment work as a lead artist at Riot Games on the recently shipped VALORANT. Currently, Devin is an art director in the R&D department at Riot Games. So we're very excited to have you both here and represent Riot Games as we go into this world of world building. So Christina and Devin, I'll let you take it away from here.
Thank you. It was like so nice to hear our profiles and also like really embarrassing to sit through it. But thank you so much for doing that. Devin, I think Devin is going to pull up our presentation, and then we'll get started. So thank you everybody for coming to our talk. We did have a little, introduction section to our talk, but maybe we'll breeze through it since we kind of got through it a bit. Could you hit the slide, Devin? So our agenda for today is I'm going to say stuff, Devin's going to say stuff, and then we'll have time for questions. So feel free to ask, whatever questions you have. Yes, so I'll talk about myself a little bit. I started my career in visual effects. This was the first game I worked on. It looks so bad. But we all have to start somewhere. I was a self-taught visual effects artist at the time. If you can click. I then went to Square Enix before I came to Riot Games. I started at Riot Games as a visual effects artist working on League of Legends. As mentioned previously, I moved into leadership where I helped to, build the operational functions of the art department globally for the company before I came back to developing games on Wild Rift as a product lead, and then eventually its art director. And then I came to VALORANT as a creative director. I've been on VALORANT for about a year now. Click and take it away, Devin.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I'll quickly blow through this. I started CG at like a really early age, like when I was pretty young, like pre-teen probably, and was really into environments and that sort of stuff. Really bad digital paintings that I have here that are just fun to show. Because again, like Christina said, everyone's got to start somewhere. I decided to go to Noman and I graduated from there. This was back when it was like the 2-year program, and kind of honed my skills there, which was awesome. And as previously mentioned, I got a gig at Blizzard. I got very lucky. They were one of the reasons I have so many projects at Blizzard that I worked on is because they kind of like overscaled and poorly planned. So Diablo 3, StarCraft 2, and a bunch of WoW stuff was coming out all at the same time. So they scaled, which was great for me because they were looking for junior people. So you never know when something like that's going to happen, which is great. But yeah, moved over to Neversoft and Infinity Ward to work on Call of Duties. I always say I worked on like the bad Call of Duties. I worked on Call of Duty Ghosts and Infinite Warfare, but was really great learning experiences and learned a lot. And then I've been at Riot for almost 8 years now, and the first 5 of those was helping develop VALORANT kind of from the ground up from the art side. And yeah, I'm in R&D now working on new unannounced stuff.
Okay, so we're here to talk about world building. And though I work on VALORANT now, I have worked on League of Legends as well as Wild Rift. So I'm going to try and contextualize it through the lens of Star Guardian. So to start, when it comes to League of Legends, if you're unfamiliar with that game, it's, a multiplayer online battle arena. It's a PvP game. It's competitive. And each game you start from scratch, essentially. And it's a 5-man team playing against a 5-person team, trying to win it out. But basically, it's a free-to-play game, and you have a bunch of characters that you can play. Something that we do in order to monetize is we monetize cosmetics. And so those cosmetics come in the form of like skins where you can, basically have like different outfits, different accessories for the character that you like to play. And so how world building plays into this is that when we think about the skins we want to make, we develop entire worlds. Sometimes players get to see all of that through our like media, like CGs, comics, whatever. Sometimes players never see it. But the reason why it's important to start there is so that everybody who works on that thing knows generally the direction that we're all pointing towards. Because we kind of like understand the world. So we understand like the mood, the kinds of shapes and colors that you might use when you're creating new content within that world. And that way we can all be empowered to work autonomously because we all kind of get the world that we're playing within. So to use an example, I'm going to take us through some of the Star Guardian world building that we did. If you can click. So typically when we think about creating a world, we really want to think about like, what are the things that inspire us? We try to grab a lot of reference material to help inform the mood, the tone, the vibe, sometimes the colors, the shape language, all of that. Especially for something like Star Guardian, where it's rooted in something that's like, relatable, like Sailor Moon, that already exists in the world. There's a lot of like obvious reference we can be gathering. Sometimes you're going to be thinking about creating a world that is really unique, and you probably, don't have a one-to-one comparison where you can just like grab reference from. It's still really important to do your research and gather a lot of reference because you still want to be able, so when you have a team of people, they can't all read your mind. And so having a lot of reference material that helps to evoke, like I said, the mood, the style, the tone, the vibe, again, just helps people contextualize like what direction you're trying to go towards. So it sort of starts as like our framing starting point. Can you click? The other thing that we think is really important when you're thinking about like building a world is to be like really specific in terms of like, hey, we want to go generally, towards like in this instance, like mystery, hopeful, wonder, cute, female power, that like kind of gives you start from here, which is like all the magical schoolgirl anime stuff, and then you start to hone it into a specific type of magical schoolgirl anime, and then you say no to the other stuff like dystopia, nihilistic, horrific, etc. That way, again, it gives the people on your team more razors to be pointing towards like the direction that you're envisioning without you having to always be there to direct everybody. Can you click? From there, once you have like all of your reference, you've started to like hone in on, it's this direction, but it's not that direction. Over time, you start to formulate like what specifically are your key pillars. And we think it's important to get to a point where you're defining those key pillars, because again, these are just extra razors that help to sharpen the focus of what everybody on your team is making. So in this particular instance, we lean towards youth, destined protectors, and magical. So that like gives us, when you think about the whole range of everything I've just talked about, like all the reference material, then the like this, not that. And now thematic pillars, you're starting to really focus in on like exactly what Star Guardian is. And that way, if let's say I created Star Guardian and I'm no longer working on it, and a completely different team wants to make new Star Guardian skins, they have all the ingredients and the recipe to understand like how to maintain that like visual cohesion and like the expression in a way that to the player feels like the same person made it, even though, we might have been this might be like our 20th skin within this universe. Click. Yeah, and then eventually what is helpful when you're world building is to start to, create the actual like backstory and like what is the specific world we're living in. So you have like your pillars, you have your general tone and vibe. Eventually you want to get to a place where you can start to contextualize like the characters that you have in your game. Like, what are they doing within this world? Like, what matters? Like, what are they fighting for? What are the stakes in the world? Again, just building the world so that people can use that information for whatever it is that they're doing, if it's making skins, if it's making CG or a comic, etc. Something to note is that this isn't like a step-by-step guide, right? Like it took us a long time to get to a place where we can say all of these things. Typically, when you're building a world, you might start in a particular, a particular vision that you have. And as you start to problem solve and look at reference and try things out, you might find that this doesn't work, but this other thing works, or something you made 6 months later helps to inform the backstory and you want to change the backstory. All of these things kind of inform each other. So something to keep in mind when you're thinking about world building is once you put a stake in the ground, it doesn't mean that, that's it. Eventually you want to get to a place where it's like well defined, but I think what I'm trying to say is like that's a process. It doesn't like just happen overnight. Yeah, and then more backstory stuff. But basically over time it grows and builds. But something I want to mention in terms of like the system in which it all kind of informs itself, the reality of when we made Star Guardian is that an artist had an idea for like a magical schoolgirl type of skin, and we made one of them. It was Lux. And she became so successful and popular that we then went back and decided we wanted to make more skins. If we're going to make more skins, we should then actually create the world so that it can inform all the other skins after that. If you click next, that's how we figured out like what archetypes the Soraka skin might play and like what kinds of colors and shapes she might have in her costuming that would help her feel within the world, but also uniquely her. All of that happened after the fact. And then we could also like expand the world and think about, well, what do the baddies, look like in this world, which wasn't a thing we had thought about when we thought about Star Guardian, years before. This is a newer thing, but this is the point of world building. It's like when you build the world, it gives you a lot of possibilities to dream up, be creative within that world once you have the guardrails defined. Yeah, if you click some more, again, everything when we talk about world building helps to inform all the decisions. So, the VFX artist understanding the world, understanding the tone and the shapes, etc., then they can use that information to feel empowered to go and make the effects that will be in the style of, Star Guardian. And you could say the same about like all the different art disciplines. As well as it helped to inform things that we did in other games like Wild Rift, the RCGs. So again, when you have the bones and the ingredients all set up for the world building, it just really helps to accelerate all the other teams who might make content within that world, and think about like hundreds of people making things for Star Guardian, and it all feels really cohesive. And that's because we started with a really strong foundation of the world that we built. I think that's it for the Star Guardian portion. Can you click one more? Yeah. And then I'm going to hand it off to Devin.
Cool. Thank you. That was awesome. Yeah, when Christina and I talked about this, she had mentioned this, that how everything is connected, and there's when we talk about it, sometimes it just seems like it's really linear. It's like someone has an idea, and then this thing happens, and this thing happens, and then everyone makes stuff, and then it's cool. But the reality is it's so difficult to talk about because the creative direction, which is like really that tone setting and vibe and world and all of that, really feeds into the art direction. But a piece that's like also so important is the game. Something like League of Legends isn't changing a lot, but when you're doing this for something like a new game, things can change quite a bit, and something that changes in the game might change the art or might change the world or something like that. The other thing that was tricky is like world building as a thing is complicated. So we're kind of tackling it from a vibe perspective, and from like an art and environment art perspective. But world building in and of itself is just a big complicated thing. But I did want to go over some stuff here. So for Valorant, basically these are slides directly from the art direction guides, essentially. And these did not just come out like this. This was one of those things that was a highly iterative process, but essentially, again, this happened in collaboration with the stuff that Christina had showed. So for Valorant, there was something similar that happened from the world building perspective of what is the vibe, what is the world that we get to play within here, and then how do we develop an art style to go along with that. And then we'll kind of go one layer even deeper after this. But one thing that's really great for Valorant is we had some pretty clear like goals for the game, things of like, hey, we want it to be stylistic, we want it to kind of like not look old, hopefully in like 5 or 10 years. We want it to perform really well on older computers, and so how do we kind of approach that? And we wanted like gameplay clarity to be really, really clear. So similar to what Christina was saying, one of the ways that we started was we looked at games that we thought did those things really well, and we kind of broke down why we thought they did and how they did it. So we would look at like Team Fortress 2 as an example. What do we like? There's great color palette control, stuff like that. And like, what did we not like? Well, there's a little bit lack of detail since it's quite a bit older, so maybe callouts are a little bit difficult for like a more tactical game. The proportions maybe are like kind of pushed a little bit into cartoony, which maybe didn't line up with some of the seriousness that we wanted in our game. Similarly, like we look at stuff like Overwatch and we did the same thing. Like, what are the things that we like and don't like? And not just shooters. We actually really like The Witness. This was actually referenced a lot early on. Just really beautiful graphic game. Same with Dishonored. Lots of really interesting stuff there. So being like broad with your reference is great. Where this style guide goes as like, oh, and this is the Valorant style, it's just right. But the reality is like to get to this was many, 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 many years, months, and years of like really iterating on it, really trying stuff out with the game and getting to where we can actually do this. This slide is here because this is the actual finished style guide. But we can break down the range from that as well, right? So now that we say what we think is just right, we can break down like similar to what Christina was saying. Once you have reference, then you want to iterate on it, and then you land on something, and then you want to solidify. You stay loose in the beginning, but eventually you need to solidify these things. And so this is an example of things being solidified. A little too simplistic on some of these other games, too realistic, and then Valorant kind of plays right in between those two things. As I mentioned before, the gameplay considerations were a huge part of actually developing the style for like a competitive game, specifically Valorant. So again, these were things that were learned along the way. And just a slide like this actually took a really long time to really solidify and be able to say like this is now like a pillar. But we have things like clean zones. We call it the reverse mullet. It's the party at the top and business at the bottom. So most places where players are going to look and shoot, the environments try and keep it nice and clean, and then you can kind of go crazier up top with stuff. There's this thing called value hierarchy. I think I have a better slide that shows this later, but just being able to like really control how light and dark something is really helps with like being able to see a person or read an ability, stuff like that. Those are the kinds of things that like from a high level are informed by the world building and then kind of inform the creation of the game afterwards. I won't go too deep into these things. These are all pretty like kind of classic. To be fair, like every game thinks about these, but we again created the rules of like, hey, where the HUD is, this is like the value range that it gets to play within, and where the VFX is, this is the value range, and the environment art. And what's again what that creates is it's called a read hierarchy. You get to see the HUD a little bit clearly because it's often the brightest thing, but it can also fall away when you don't need to look at it. But things like VFX and characters will always pop over the environment as an example, because they're the most important things to see. Stuff like that's really important. And here's an example of the value hierarchy kind of in practice. and you can get real tricky with it. Like even in the clean zones, you can keep the values even lower in the environment, so everything pops really nicely. And believe it or not, this is one of those things that it's like it's pretty basic. Like all those games that we pointed to do this, but to like hone in on it for your specific game and your specific um, uh, project is pretty complicated. Um, Composition is another big one. This is like again, this really just helps like draw the eye of where you want to be. And you'll notice that these things kind of stack on top of each other. So if you say like, hey, business at the bottom, party at the top, like that's cool to say and you can represent it, but like these are kind of examples of where that really starts to play play in, where your contrast, your colors, all of those things are really like part of the overall image, and you want to be really careful about all of that stuff. This is all like really, what's funny is this is all like really basic art school stuff, and this is like the stuff we talk about all the time. And just nailing this stuff and getting better and better at this stuff is actually pretty cool. I think League is really League and Wild Rift are like really good at really nailing these things as well. Valorant has like a really controlled, I keep talking about color and value, but like really limiting your colors is a really big part of like making an appealing image and like stylizing something. So like as an example, in this example on the right, like yeah, you're probably not often going to find a place that is like all that red and warm colors. But that's the kind of thing that we can do in a stylized game, where we can kind of push it but still try and make it feel believable, and then find those little pops of color and detail where we want. And playing with warms and cools, we do this a lot on bomb sites, where like one bomb site will be cool and one bomb site will be warm. Again, this is like really simple basic art stuff, but that's there's a reason they're fundamentals, and the reason they're taught because they're really important. So there's more examples here. What I want to point out is like, to the point of like really being able to be specific with what your world is and how you execute on it is really what the art direction docs are about, all the way down to this sort of stuff, to where like, hey, even in a texture on a prop, how are you approaching it? And we have a whole, you can see, if you could click there, there's a whole texture creation guide that links to something else that goes into even more detail of like what brushes to use and why. And being able to define your stuff that deeply, you pretty much have to understand what your world is, and you have to understand what your vibe is and your game's goals as well. Um, so all of that's cool. And like I said, a lot of that is like high level, lots of years of work, but like practically, like how do we get there? Like Christina said, these things are going up and down. Some decision somewhere else might actually change the art direction. So these are stolen slides from our coworker Theo, so I won't be able to speak to them super well. But from a concepting art standpoint, Christina mentioned we start with like an idea and a lot of reference to begin with, right? And that's always awesome, but then you eventually have to turn that into your game or your thing you're working on, right? And that usually starts with concept art. And so where we start with concept art is we call it blue sky, where we kind of just go crazy. Not super crazy, because obviously some reference and some ideas and stuff should have already been defined, as Christina had showed earlier. But this is our chance to kind of like push the boundaries of stuff and really try stuff. And this is really one of those areas that doing something new and unique and different might slightly change like the overall rules of the world. And so you want to actually give room to try that stuff here. So from there, they typically, the concept artist will work closely with a 3D artist. Ideally, you have like a lead or like a really senior person that can kind of really help say like, hey, this is like, again, you want to keep it open, but you also want someone to like be like, yeah, we can do that, or like, dude, there's no way we could ever do that. You want to kind of stay practical to some extent as well. And finding that balance is tricky, but something that you typically get with experience. And then this is that codifying that style, right? So basically starting from blue sky, working with 3D to execute on it. And then this is that part I was talking about that takes a long time on projects, where you can literally now say you have a rule. And again, this is where concept art is helpful. what's really cool, what I love working with the concept artist with is like this draw over and paint over stage. So after the blue sky stuff, especially where it's like, hey, the sky's the limit, you can do whatever you want. It does need to be a game, like I said. And so what typically happens is they'll either draw over the gray box of the map, so that game designers have just made a map out of boxes literally, and then now it's like the concept artists and the art director's chance to kind of like figure out what the theming is and how to make it work. And it's pretty fun, and a great concept artist can like turn boxes into some amazing stuff. But on top of that, even after an environment art pass has been done, you can kind of see this GIF that's like looping. Even after an environment art pass has been done, it's pretty common to have the concept artist go over one more time and really add some flair. And typically that concept artist is working closely with the art director, and they really know those rules and those pillars that we've defined, and so they can kind of help bring all that stuff back into it. All right, so that's a lot, but like, what is it like in real life, essentially? So again, we're beating you over the head of this process, but this really is the process, right? So Christina just showed like how something like Star Guardian from like top to bottom could be defined as like a world, and this is like a smaller version of that, of like being in a Valorant map. How does that work, right? And it's the same thing. You research and find your reference, and you start from there. So this is for the map Lotus. Some early explorations and ideas there. Christina actually could probably talk more about this if you guys have questions, but there's also, this isn't just an art exploration. There is world building, story, character, all sorts of other things happening like on the game that this map needs to fit into. And so, yes, there's like really great art explorations happening here, but this is like one piece of the bigger puzzle. And then similarly, right, we start with these sketches and start drawing over the area, what it could look like, doing this blue sky stuff and figuring out these color compositions and stuff early. And you also want to like, it shows kind of an example here of, you want to kind of consider other maps that you have as a whole. So like maybe this one, like we never had a map that had like this really nice pink accent to the color, and that's like something that we can kind of lean into to make that map feel unique. As an example, like we always do these doll houses on the maps, and when you kind of put them all together, you start to see like, yeah, obviously they feel like they all come from Valorant, but each one should have a little bit of a piece of uniqueness to them, even at this like really abstract version. And then the concept artist will make all the props, not all the props, a lot of the props. And again, this really helps add, this is just as much reference gathering in this as anything else. Shape, language, color, everything is super important. And then this will either be sent off for like an outsourcing team to make, or the internal team will just pick away at these and make some really awesome props to kind of add life to everything. Just more examples of sketches here. And then just, again, drawing over things repeatedly just to make sure you find it the right thing. So you can see this is a block out on the far left here. This is after the initial sketch. This is kind of what it turns into. And you just keep like this process, ideally, if you have the time, should be really iterative, just like everything else we've talked about. And so we've found the best have been when we have the time to do that, where like the amazing 2D artist can draw over the amazing 3D artist stuff, and it's really aligned with what the overall game is looking for. And I think Lotus was a good example of having that time and having that experienced team. And I don't know what these are. I think I know what these are. These were like, so this is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Valorant, but the two on the left are from Ascent, and the top one on the right is from Bind, and the bottom one is from Haven. These were really early sketches and ideas of what the map could look like. You can see nuggets of like where the map landed, but you can also see like, to the point of like, this stuff doesn't just come together magically. We had to try a lot of different stuff before we really landed on what the game looked like and felt like, and how far we wanted to push things. And so these are beautiful paintings, but pretty far out of line of like where the game actually landed. And I think that's it. That is it.
Yeah, and I just wanted to end that, say like what's invisible from everybody here within the slides is like how many people worked on all of those assets and how many different like decisions those artists had to make every single day. And all of those artists come from different backgrounds. They have different, like some went to art school and some didn't. Some have different cultural backgrounds, et cetera. Like everybody has a different world perspective. And so being able to move all of those teams towards a singular cohesive vision is like why creating that world and being really communicating specifically like what that is, like why that's so important, so that all of these people with like different perspectives and opinions can all be moving towards the same direction. And yeah, that's the presentation. So we have plenty of time for questions if anybody has questions.
Feel free to use that Q&A box. Great presentation though, guys. I love seeing all of the behind the scenes artwork, the concept art. Very beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we kind of blew through
We
it.
can go with a starter question that I have.
Sure.
I'm wondering, since a lot of our audience here are high school students, for example, I'm wondering what are some of those like essential skills that a high school student could work to gain in order to be better prepared to perhaps pursue a career in games later on?
I think, kind of going back to, so if we're talking specifically about art, I'll start there. Going back to some of the stuff that Devin was saying, like through the slides, the nice thing is there's like so much free information out there, like through books, through YouTube, through all kinds of tutorials, but everything always kind of like goes back to the very, very foundations of art, like really understanding like the power of shapes and how that can communicate a feeling you're trying to drive, value, composition, all of these like core foundations, which I think you can find a lot of information on. I would say like if you're pursuing art, those are all things that you will always be drawing on throughout your career. Like I can say as someone who didn't go to art school at all, like it was at first a bit of a struggle. Like I think I had some instincts, but it took me time to figure out like what that stuff was. And so I would say like now that there's so much free information out there, that would be a great place to start. But generally speaking, like if you're not pursuing art and you're just pursuing games, I think it's the same thing is true, which is there is just so much free knowledge, free software that you can try. And I think like dabbling and sort of feeling the experience of doing things just will help you experience it, right? And like be able to figure out like what do you even like and how, like what subdiscipline do you even want to pursue? Yeah, I don't know, Devin, if there's anything else you want to add.
No, I think you nailed it. I think from an art perspective, like at least starting there, one thing I'll add, I guess, is like I still learn this because I still work with some amazing people. Especially when I started out, I'd work with someone amazing. They'd be doing something like it just looked so natural, like it was like magic that they were doing something. And then when you would like ask them to break down what they were doing, it was always like it didn't none of it came naturally. And they were always like, oh, I always think about this, and this every time I do anything. And then after I'm done, I do it like this. Like there's always a process, there's always thinking. Um, and there's always kind of rules to what people are doing. So even though art kind of seems like magic, it's actually like very learnable. And the people that look like the most like they're magicians are actually the people that are just really deeply thinking about it all the time. And again, this was something I learned pretty early on and something I still kind of have to be reminded of because people make it look so effortless. But it's really like a learned skill, which is actually really encouraging because that means anyone can be a badass eventually.
That's great and very encouraging too. And like you said, Devin, I think fundamentals are fundamentals for a reason, and you can always build upon them. All right, so we've started to get questions in our Q&A box. We have one from Joshua who says, "Hello, Christina and Devin. I'm still struggling on building a world. Any tips along with tone?"
I think
Well, yeah, go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna like just like focus on that, the tone thing. Like I think really understanding your tone and vibe of the world is like one of the best things to start at. And then those references, like where do you then finding similar things that have done it. So if you want to do like a dark, moody game, like you can now go look at references, break down how they've done it, see where they're successful, as well as see where they're not, and start setting up those rules along that. I think tone and mood and vibe are like always a great place to start like world building stuff.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'll add to that is like eventually it's also just about like trying it out because I think sometimes we can get like overly stuck in like trying to figure out the perfect reference or the perfect world or whatever before we start. But the reality is that you're going to figure you can't figure stuff out until you actually like play with it, right? And so I think like once you have a general tone and vibe, I think like try it out and from actually physically, tactically, like trying it, you'll start to hone in on like what works for you, what doesn't work for you.
Great. All right, we have Esther M, who's asking, what are some basic things to include in concept art? I'm guessing for a portfolio, maybe?
If for a portfolio, for me, I really like to see, I mean, ultimately, concept art really boils down to a person's ability to solve a problem. Because generally, concept artists have like a pretty ambiguous thing that they have to like visualize, and then be able to visualize it, right? And so what I like to see in portfolios is your problem solving methodology. So like if it's characters, I like to see thumbnails. They don't have to be perfectly rendered concept. And in fact, like that's probably something I don't really want to see. I want to see all the different iterations that led you to the decision that you made so that I can see visually through your work, like how you think through problems.
Yeah, I honestly don't have anything to add. Like that is like the most important thing when looking at portfolios for concept artists. Um, the like I guess slight thing I would add would be, and this is kind of true for all art disciplines, is like I guess know your audience. Like if you really, 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 really want to work at Blizzard, like your work should have you should have at least some Blizzard work in it, Blizzard style work. Um, and yeah, the same kind of goes for everything, any other job. So even now, it's funny if I'm looking at places like they'll be like, well, you worked on Valorant, so you can't do like realistic stuff. And I'm like, well, I worked on Call of Duty for like many years before that. And it's just really easy for people to just look at something and be like, they can or can't do the thing I'm expecting them to do. So yeah, I would definitely keep in mind like what genre, what game, what studio you're going for, and make sure you have some of that stuff represented. And that again, not just for concept art. That I think that's true for all disciplines.
Great. All right, we have a question from D. Dubose, and sorry if I'm mispronouncing. They ask, how does it feel to see your work realized inside the game after it's completed?
It feels awesome because usually it's like months, if not years of work before you get to see it pay off. And of course, there's a lot of anxiety around whether players are going to like it. Yeah, it feels incredible to see my work in the game.
Yeah, it's like it's the most rewarding part of the job. I think like Riot's really unique because we have like live updates. And so like if you're on League of Legends or on Valorant now, you have a chance of like getting your work out in front of players like every 2 weeks, which is pretty awesome. But in AAA or developing something new, you might be working on something for years and just hoping and praying that people like what you have when it comes out. And um, yeah, like I said, I've been on the receiving end of both of like unhappy players and happy players, but just getting something out and seeing it out there is really really rewarding.
Love that. All right, and an anonymous attendee asks, I'm a VFX artist. I know there was a difference between film and game. What do we need to improve to get into games? I
For
guess, yeah, what are the
yeah,
differences there?
For VFX, I would say it's a really, really big difference. And so for games, typically we have to think about things that can look good in like 360 because a lot of times players can see an effect from all angles, whereas in film, it's pre-rendered. It's only ever going to be that one angle that you need to make a thing look good in. And the other thing is with pre-rendered and film, it can be really expensive. It can use up a lot of memory because you're going to pre-render it and then that's it. People will just see it like that. In games, typically your machine is going to have to be able to render it in real time. And so, especially with competitive games, you're going to want to create like good looking effects from 360 degrees that are really performant, which usually means very few particles, small textures. And so there's a lot of problem solving in that way when it comes to games, which is like, how do you make a thing look good and perform it at the same time?
Yeah,
That's a
nothing to
very
add.
important distinction. Making sure something looks good from all sides. Sorry, Devin, did you have something to add to that as
Nope,
well?
I think that was perfect. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, actually, speaking of 3D and making sure things are looking good from all sides, another anonymous attendee had asked, how would you integrate 8-bit art in a 3D game?
I think I was thinking about this when I saw it, and there's a million ways you could do it. So I don't think I could give you like a specific answer, but one thing I would say is part of the world building kind of thinking. I think that Christina's section really showed off as well, which was like being really thoughtful about what you're trying to do. And so like if you just like the 8-bit aesthetic and you want to put it into 3D, then like that's going to be pretty hard to find the right way of going about it. But if you're like, hey, I love the nostalgia feeling that like an 8-bit game gives you, but I want the feeling of something more modern, that's like already one step further thinking of like um some goals there essentially. So I think the more you can like really break down the what's exciting about the 8-bit art style and why you want to put it in 3D, if you can start kind of creating some of those rules and pillars, I think it can kind of help answer what that execution looks like.
Great answer. All right. Okay, Ms. Dubos's class with more questions. What would be the educational pathway a student should take after graduating high school? What is the best way to get their work noticed to be able to work in this industry?
I think that there's like the traditional ways where there are university and college courses or like specialty schools like Devin went to with Noman that really help you hone in on the skills and set you on the path. But I also think there are like infinite ways to get into the industry. I know so many people who didn't study games at all or like went to law school. I think Devin and I both worked with someone who went to law school and now is like the executive producer for a game. So there's like so many different ways. And I think like your passion, it's cheesy, but your passion and love for games and like really understanding why and what kind of impact you want to make on the games industry or like on video games. Is a great way to get into games.
Yeah, I think
Great.
that's good. That's other thing I would add is like whatever way you take, you're gonna have to work your ass off. So if you go to a 4-year school, you're still gonna have to work your ass off to like get a job. If you go to like a specialty school or if you're self-taught, either way you have to work really hard. And I think that's like the main thing is just make sure you're putting the time in because there's a lot of really, really talented, passionate people who are putting their time in and trying to get noticed. And as far as like best ways to get noticed is, it's the same as everybody, right? Like do some cool stuff and put it on ArtStation or post it on your social medias or share it on Reddit or whatever. And eventually you start to kind of pick up steam and be consistent with it as well if that's something that you're really interested in. The other way, honestly, is just have really good art and apply for somewhere. And we go through every single portfolio when people apply, and the good ones always stand out. So
Fantastic. All right. So for those in the audience who have already graduated, do you have any tips on finding a job or breaking in to the games industry from there?
I mean, my biggest tip would be like practice your resilience, I think, because when you're starting out, it can feel really daunting. There's probably like dream studios you want to work for, but maybe they're not looking. Maybe there are like smaller studios that are like willing to take you on, but like they're not working on a game that's like really exciting for you. And so ultimately, like if you want to have a career in games, you're probably going to have like a really long career, right? Like we're typically working for a long time. So my tip is like don't get so caught up in like exactly having the perfect start. I always, I think that like people should just get experience, because getting experience like on what a real pipeline is like, as well as like working with other people, all of those things are like so invaluable that you can get anywhere, and then will set you up to get that dream job later down the line.
That is great life advice too. Devin, anything you want to add as well?
I think that that's great. I mean, it's so stupid for me to be like, oh, I had to do that as well. Like, but my first job was at Blizzard. It's like, oh, wow. But like, I wanted to work in game, and like, I was not getting any in-game offers. And even at Blizzard, it was so stupid. They're like, hey, do you want to be a map painter? It's like, no, I want to be a modeler. And they're like, well, we're not offering you that. And it was just really stupid, but I kept an open mind. It was like an amazing job, and it was a great stepping stone for me to actually get in game. And that could have happened from a small indie studio, or I don't know, working in VR and meta, or who knows what. So just knowing that like your first job is your first job, and like Christina said, get your foot in the door, learn as much as you can there, and just be prepared to just rock it after that.
Great advice. All right. We have someone who asked, how would you recommend for college designers and artists to showcase their skills and more in their portfolios? As a graphic design major with a game design dream, I have huge ideas, but struggle with scope when it comes to showcasing ideation, world building, game mechanics, and user interfaces.
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff to try and show. I would say, even though I said like cast a wide net when it comes to looking for work, I also think like having a focus of like what subdiscipline you really want to dip your toe in and like get good at. I think like even now as a creative director, I would say it would be like really difficult for me to try and get really competent and good at like game design as well as engineering or whatever, right? Like having a focus just helps you get better at that thing. And so I think like my first thing is to say would be like maybe pick one of those things rather than all of it. And then from there, when it comes like what to put in your portfolio, put your best stuff in there. You don't have to put the like 50 different things that you made. I think like obviously we want to see how you problem solve, and so you can do that within like a piece that you did. But when we're looking at portfolios, we get a pretty good sense after like a few pieces of like where this person's skills are at. So we don't need to see like a ton of content, if that helps to minimize the scope a bit for you.
I have nothing to add. That was a perfect answer.
Fantastic. All right. Uma asks, how do you go about selecting a team for the process of world building? I think, Christina, you had said that these teams that you guys work with are huge, right?
Yeah, I mean, for world building in itself, you'll start with probably pretty small. It might be just the creative director, or it might be someone with the vision. Over time, it kind of, especially at a company like Riot, it starts to build with more and more people. But agnostic of like the kind of company you're working at, I would say Devin probably has a great answer for this because he's great at building teams. But generally, it's like working with people who you can solve problems with, right? Because ultimately, like world building is a creative process. You want to be able to dream and put out all kinds of ideas and not worry about if someone's going to judge you for the idea that you're putting out there, and be able to have like a trusting relationship with your team members that like if they challenge an idea you put out there, it's because we're doing the work to make it better versus like worrying about what other people think. And so like that team needs to have that like strong sense of like trust and psychological safety in order to like dream big. That's how I would go about building that team.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And yeah, I mean, just to double down on that or double click on it, it's like it does typically start small, even for a game. It's can be one, two, three, four people at most. really solving the world stuff and then expanding from there. And the only other thing I will add there is like Christina mentioned, like having focus, right? Like I come from an environment art background. I'm pretty confident in environment stuff, but like characters are a really big part of what your world is. And so when you're building that team, like for me, I really make sure I have like a really amazing character person who really deeply understands characters who can help fill those gaps.
Fantastic. All right. Josephine asks, what do the crossroads of visually appealing and functionality look like? When does that conversation happen and what things are usually considered?
I feel like this was littered all over the slides we showed, but that's really like tons and tons of conversations and like challenging each other on like, visual appealing versus functional. And they don't, it doesn't mean that they're like opposed. You're just trying to find the sweet spot of the appeal you're going for and the functionality that you're going for at a company like ours, because we make competitive games, like gameplay will always win. And so we might want to make something that like has a lot of visual detail, but if it impedes on the competitiveness of the game, then usually the art side will concede and we'll like try to find other ways to solve that problem. So we can still get like the feeling that we're trying to go for, but it's like highly readable. But those kinds of conversations are happening all the time.
Yeah, it's so collaborative. I think there was the slide I had that showed that like as part of the concept process, it's like then talking with the 3D artist, because the 3D artist is going to have a lot of like functionality questions of like, hey, I literally can't build this, or this would be expensive, or whatever it would be. And that just happens on every possible level and every possible cross discipline. Like that's like one of the main reasons why making games is so exciting, because it's just so collaborative in kind of this specific way, at least from the artist standpoint.
Great. All right. Channy asks, AI seems to be affecting 2D concept artists quite a lot. Many of 2D artists are starting to lose their jobs. What do you think about how AI is going to be affecting 3D departments like environment departments, character modeling, etc.? Hot topic.
Yeah, Devin and I talk about this a lot, from my perspective at least. I don't want to speak for you, Devin. AI is one of those things where it's a tool that people are using now. I know that there's a lot of fear around, a loss of jobs or people, or minimizing of jobs. So far, at least that I've seen, I haven't seen that yet. But I am seeing how artists are able to leverage these new tools to make themselves work faster. So helping you to, come up with 100 different ideas that, similar to what I was saying earlier about like gather your reference, you could potentially use AI as a tool to help you generate ideas that you can start pulling from. And then from there, use it as a way to like make the thing that you want to make. But it helps to just like quicken that idea generation. That's how I'm seeing us use it now. But yeah, Devin, I know you have thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is we're pretty insulated here at Riot. We're not told we have to use it. We're not expected to use it. And as far as I know, pretty much no one is using it, and certainly no one's lost their job because of it. Um, so we don't have a lot of clear view of it. I will say, as far as like how is this going to affect 3D departments and stuff, it's like it definitely is. Like I've played around with like making Shrek from a 2D image into 3D or whatever. And it's like, it sucks now, but like, it's going to be good enough soon to where it could be used in certain things. So I think like it's here to stay. We all need to understand what it's good at and honestly like what it's bad at, because it's going to be bad forever at a lot of stuff. And a lot of the stuff it's going to be bad at is the stuff that we talked about today, which is like thinking about world building and on a deep level to where you can like actually make creative decisions based on really specific criteria. Like those are the things that are valuable now and will be continue to be valuable in the future.
Great. I I think we have time for maybe one more question that I don't think we've covered yet from, I think, Ms. Dubos's class. How would you promote a brand new game with art?
What do we mean by promote?
I'm wondering, is the art maybe made for marketing promotion, treated differently than the art that's used in world building, for example?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, it depends, right? Like every game and company is going to have like their way of doing it. Some games I've seen, they want to leverage marketing art as a way to sort of like produce this like idealized version that you can fantasize yourself to be in, but then the game experience is like a little bit different, but that's like a really intentional choice. And then some, it's like completely cohesive, such that you might be using some game assets for the marketing materials as well. So it all really depends on the goals that you're trying to achieve.
Great. All right, I know we're right at time, and Devin, I see you typing an answer to the last question. Do you want to just
I can throw it.
give
I
your
can throw it
answer out
out.
loud?
Yeah, I can throw it out. If you need to leave, Christina, I can cover it.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
like
Christina.
yes and no, like all of that stuff is considered. That some of those slides I showed you earlier were about like setting the rules of where each discipline can play. And those rules are set because then if you follow them, everything should work together forever, ideally, until someone comes up with like some crazy new ability or whatever. But yeah, ideally that's basically how it works. Is like we're not necessarily looking at an ability in a new map or vice versa, but as long as you understand your box of what abilities can play within and maps understands their box of where they can play within, there should be a cohesion and there should be um um yeah, I don't know, I guess a cohesion there that works. I think like Valorant's, still pretty new, but I think League has shown they've set up very similar rules on League, and I think League has shown quite a wide breadth of stuff. Obviously there's missteps that happen when you have that much content, but yeah, I think if your rules are solid and thoughtful, they should be able to work over a lot of different content for a long time.
It sounds like it all ladders up to know your pillars.
Yeah, yep,
Yes.
exactly.
All
Absolutely.
right, well, we're right. A minute over. Thank you both, Devin and Christina, for participating in this speaker series. It was super illuminating to hear about your journeys and your work, and to hear about the process overall. It was super inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank
Thanks
you
for having
everybody for all the
us.
thoughtful questions.
Yeah, that was awesome.
All
Have a
right.
great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks
Bye
Thank
all.
everyone.
you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.